My advice to all of us is that we honor and validate our romantic longing rather than shaming and invalidating it. Hello, sunshine, and welcome back to Paradigm Shift with Ayandastood, a place where we reframe what is and reimagine what could be. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Let's paradigm shift together. Today's episode is brought to you by you, yourself, and you all, because I put out a little bit of a poll on my Spotify asking you, what is the topic you most want to hear, giving you a few options. And I don't know if I'm surprised by the results. I do not know. But here were the 5 options: beauty, politics, creativity advice, friendship tings, romantic longing, and the 5th was big tech and the attention economy. And what emerged as the winner, as you can tell, is romantic longing. And she's intriguing, she's fascinating, she's interesting, and she's interested. So I am thrilled to be diving into this topic a little bit deeper with you, sharing my experiences and thoughts and some of the wisdom that I've come to. And for this episode, I reread the book Communion by Bell Hooks, The Female Search for Love. And it was such a delicious experience because there's so much wisdom and there's a lot of ways that it can be brought into where we are now. So just a quick plug is I would love to have your voices be part of this podcast. So in the link in the show notes, you will see an option to leave me a voicemail. In reality, it's not a voicemail at all. You go onto this website and you leave a voice note. It's very, very simple. And I'm hoping to get to 20 responses by the end of the week. So I would love to hear from you. Do you have a question, a thought, a piece of advice you want to either seek or provide? Because we're all students and we're all teachers. I really believe that. I would love to learn from you. Is there a paradigm shift that you want to share? Is there anything that you want to react to that could be meaningful to other people? The reason why I'm doing this and not a form is because I think the voice carries the energy and the charge, and we get to hear why this matters to you. What's the context? What's happening in your life? And we get to kind of receive your actual energy as part of the podcast rather than the way that my voice would interpret and share your words. So please do leave me a voice note. The link is in the show notes, and keep interacting on Spotify. I'm loving all the comments and the feedback and the participation on the polls. I really appreciate it. If you do not listen on Spotify, don't worry. We see each other. We've got each other. Those that do listen on Spotify will carry on their backs. Those that don't, in terms of the survey responses and so forth. But you can always send me an email or reach out to me on Instagram or Substack or wherever. And I am a slow responder because I'm living my life, but I will hopefully eventually respond. You know, some things in life is like, I was not born for a world with email. That I do know. So let us get into this juicy topic, which is romantic longing, full of intrigue, full of resonance on a soul level. And I want to set the stage, let's get the furniture in place. Let's get the props. Let's get the lighting right, the backdrop. What are we talking about when we talk about romantic longing? This is the specific human experience of longing for, yearning, craving romantic partnership or partnerships to my polyamorous listeners, and craving this intimate and deeply, often physical, but doesn't have to be, connection and intimacy with someone. You are craving being held, and you are craving holding. You're craving cuddling, dates, and experiences together. You are craving being spoken to as a subject of love, being complimented, and being thought of as this divine presence on this earth. You are craving being seen and having a safe space to share your secrets, late at night chatting, pillow talking, but I don't think that means what I intended to mean, but whatever. And also, if you are someone who is into sex and being sexual, you are craving that safe container of sexual connection and the ability to grow with someone in your sexual intimacy, right? And experiences. And you are craving this deep and rich love. And you've done the work and you know what you're looking for. And you love yourself, but you also want to be loved by someone else. And that is all so human. And maybe there are lots of barriers that you experience between you and romantic love. So I've always felt like romantic love is for other people to experience. Like especially a long-term romantic partner. I've always felt like it's never going to be me. You know what I mean? Like I'm not the one who's going to be in a romantic partnership. It will always be this experience that's always and already outside of my reach. And I've had like short-term relationships, but I haven't been, I'm 28, like in like a long-term one of those relationships. And there's such a hierarchy of love that exists in our society where romantic partnership and romantic love are put on a hierarchy and seen as more valid, more worthwhile, more meaningful, and more of a qualifier of your existence on this earth. So that is called Imaginormativity. So anyways, it feels like this thing that I always feel like I'm on the outside looking into, right? And like, oh, it will never be me. And so as we think of the context and setting the stage, I thought that this tweet was the perfect synthesis or summary of what we are talking about today. And what this person, North Star Doll, says is, I'm focusing on myself. And then in parentheses or brackets, depending on where you're from, pretending I'm not consumed by loneliness and romantic longing every night. And I think that does such a wonderful job of encapsulating this duality that so many of us are experiencing. What we are willing to own and claim, like focusing on ourselves, loving ourselves, doing us, focusing on creativity, focusing on our friends, etc., all very valid and wonderful. But there is still this feeling that, and there should be, that we still do crave, many of us, romantic love. Like even as we want to be self-loving and we want to love our friends and we want to we still do, many of us crave this romantic partnership and being held and holding and having these spaces of intimacy that are linked to a certain kind of connection and that are in their nature rooted in love and a loving partnership or partnerships. Okay. So that is what we are talking about today, is this tension. And we're trying to give voice for the parentheses to be the main sentence, right? That we shouldn't have to silence or deny our longings. We shouldn't have to only experience them on our own. We shouldn't have to have no room to admit that we really do crave this form of love that feels outside of our reach. So that's what I want to really give voice to today. And how I frame this is it's going to be 15 pieces of wisdom on romantic longing that I want to leave you with and discuss with you. And there's going to be 2 parts to this series so that I can break it up and really bring my fullest energy to both of the parts. So let's jump into it. Okay, let's jump into the meat of the conversation, which is these pieces of wisdom. Number 1, and it links perfectly to that tweet that we just discussed. Number 1, my advice to all of us is that we honor and validate our romantic longing rather than shaming and invalidating it. Okay? So when you have a longing within you, it's easy to say, no, okay, I can't long for that because I don't have it. So I'm just going to pretend that I don't and move on and focus on doing me, focus on romanticizing my life, focus on love of self, and so on and so forth. And yet I think that that is closing us off to a deeper longing that we have within us that is yearning to be seen. Like it's not shameful or desperate or not feminist or wrong to crave romantic partnership. And this part of us is something to honor because I believe that our feelings are kind of like little children within us. And we can either say to them, why are you saying that? No, like stop talking. Or we could say, wait, what do you have to say? What's going on? Where is this coming from? And how can I help you? How can I make you feel truly heard and truly acknowledged and seen? And I think with our longings, I know for myself, there's been this kind of trajectory that I've gone on where I went from very desperately longing to like pretending as though I didn't long at all. But that was because it was easier to make sense of myself if I conceived of myself as someone who was okay with not having romantic love, rather than having to grapple with the tension of not having something that I really wanted, but also wanting to have a life that I wanted. You know what I mean? Basically, like, I don't want to live my life rooted in the lack that I experience. Like I want to try and find the abundance. But then when lack does come up and does pain me and I get those pangs of cravings or longings, I don't want to be someone who silences that and rejects it and denies it and invalidates it as though oh no, I'm not loving myself hard enough. You know, this language around the hyper individualism. Just go on solo dates. Just take yourself seriously and romanticize your life. And yet when we are told what that looks like, it's often so rooted in consumption and in photographing and performing self-love rather than being in self-love, which is wonderful, but it shouldn't be something that silences our longings and our cravings. To that point, I think that Bell Hooks' book Communion is such a wonderful resource for this. She speaks about the need for people who take love seriously to create new visions, new maps, new journeys, and to take love seriously and to kind of erect like schools of love and understanding that like love is everything. There's a quote where she says that like love with a single partner is not everything. Love itself is everything. And so I want to read you this quote from the book Communion by Bell Hooks. And although she bases it in, it's a feminist book and she bases it in women's experiences, I think that this book can be made relevant to anyone who is seeking to love without supremacy. Do you know what I mean? Because I actually think that the broader need is not that. I think that the broader goal should be to uproot domination, as she says, from our relationships. And she says that love cannot exist where domination exists and vice versa. And yet domination is something that so many of us have learned through family, through media, through culture, through society. And so no relationship is protected from supremacy. The two people, 3 people, 5 people involved have to do the work of unlearning supremacy in order to be in loving relationship to each other. And so whether that is a queer relationship, a polyamorous relationship, if that person or those people are rooted in an understanding of domination within love, they will not have a healthy love, or in her definition, they will not have love at all. So that's why I want to broaden this to like everyone, women, non-binary people, queer people, all types of people who are seeking love that exists outside of supremacy culture, which is radical. You know what I mean? It is radical to have relationships that are rooted in, as she says, a mutual commitment to each other's spiritual growth, as she says in All About Love. I'll just read you this quote as it is. My hope for younger generations of women is that they will examine the unfulfilled spaces of their lives soon and boldly, unabashedly choosing to do the work of love, placing it above everything. Again and again, it must be stated that when I talk about doing the work of love, I am not talking simply about partnership. I am talking about the work of self-love in conjunction with the work of relational love. So that's really important that we take seriously as people who are seeking love without supremacy, love rooted in mutual commitment and mutual care, that we find ways to take seriously the parts of our lives where we feel unfulfilled. And then when she's saying choosing to do the work of love, she speaks about how love does take effort. You know, I'm going to use the word effort instead of work. Love takes time. She says, you know, so many of us say that we value love, and then you look at how we spend our time and we are not committing to doing the work, the effort, the time of love. And I know that that's very influenced by capitalism and how much free time we all have and how we feel when we do have free time and what types of experiences we cling to in that time as a reprieve, and that we don't have shared space, shared time, shared resources, all of these things. But I do want to say that I think it's really incredible that she's encouraging us to take seriously that love is everything, and that love is what we should put first in the way that we live our lives, and that when we do yearn for love and crave for love, we should never silence that yearning or that craving. We should honor it, we should seek to understand it, and we should seek to find ways to fulfill that void that we are feeling within us if we can. So as we honor and validate love, I want to bring in the word integrity. And what I learned is that integrity at its root means wholeness. So if we are living in integrity, we are living as whole beings, right? And so when we have this part of ourselves that we feel but do not want to recognize, we are in a way not living in integrity because we're rejecting a part of ourselves. And yet wholeness is integrating all of us, even the parts we would seek to relegate to the shadows or deny or reject. So I think a very important second piece of wisdom that I want to provide, linked to the first, is how can we integrate rather than reject our longing? And by integrate, I mean make it part of us, part of our conception of ourselves, of the world. Like, can we create from that place? Can we share from that place? Can we speak to that place instead of denying it and relegating it to the shadows? When we integrate something, we bring it into our being. We say, this longing, it's not there, it's here, it's in me, it's in my heart, it's in my soul. It is a part of me and I am a part of it. That is what it means to integrate. And instead of rejecting something, I can ask myself, what is this thing trying to show me? What is it trying to teach me? What is it trying to point me towards or guide me away from? And I want to give you an example from my own life. The times in my life where I've had the strongest, most insistent romantic longing have been times when I felt most unfulfilled in my life generally. Working a job I did not feel aligned to or connected with, surrounded by some friendships that didn't feel as enriching as I would hope to have in my life. And so there was that void within me, that space. And I reacted to that by trying to pursue romantic love. But what I think I should have done, or what I would do now, is integrate, like, how can I bring more fullness and less lack into my being? How can I find romantic spaces in my life that exist? Like, how can I try and rethink my friendships and see if I can reach out to people who I think I would be really good friends with, or make sure that I'm seeing and speaking to and in touch with the people who do make me feel really full? And how can I at the time didn't see myself as creative at all. I had no creative outlet, as they say. So now I feel so full of life, full of erotic energy, because I love the things that I'm creating and the people that I'm creating it for. And I love being in touch with myself in this medium and in this way through the medium of creativity. And I love the friendships that I have in my life. So if I integrate my longing, I see it as a space that is looking to be filled, and a space that's also trying to tell me about how I'm living my life today and how I'm not living in integrity and alignment, in the sense that maybe I feel like I'm surrounded by people who don't really hear me or see me, and therefore I'm channeling all of this romantic longing into romance and this fantasy in my head of a partner, when it may actually be trying to teach me something about my state of being today. And with that, I want to read you a passage from the uses of the erotic. And if you enjoy this idea of integrating and finding a way to let your longing be a guide, I highly recommend you listen to my episode on redefining the erotic and reclaiming the erotic, and that you read Audre Lorde's essay, The Uses of the Erotic, because that is so much what this conversation is about. And so I would love to read to you from that essay right now. And sit back and relax, because it's a little bit of a long quote. Okay, so Audre Lorde says, "When we live outside ourselves, and by that I mean on external directives only, rather than from our own internal knowledge and needs. When we live away from those erotic guides from within ourselves, then our lives are limited by external and alien forms, and we conform to the needs of a structure that is not based on human need, let alone an individual's. But when we begin to live from within outward," you see what she's saying? Instead of from outward inward, from within, from our needs, our eros, our energy, outward, in touch with the power of the erotic within ourselves, and allowing that power within to inform and illuminate our actions upon the world around us, then we begin to be responsible to ourselves in the deepest sense. Do you see how powerful what she's saying is? And that is why we cannot silence our longing, because our longing is coming from within. Obviously, it's shaped from the world, and that's another thing. We have to interrogate why we long for what we long for. Is there a deeper longing that this longing is concealing? So, for example, while I thought I was longing for a romantic partner, I was really also longing at a deeper level to feel like I was experiencing eros in my life. You know, like I felt that I was craving erotic energy, and I could only conceive of one channel that I could experience that through. So when we begin to go inwards and listen to that inner craving and that inner longing and that eros that's begging to be seen and to be actualized. And then we actualize that from inward outward. We paint the world with our consciousness. And the world could mean through our art and through the sharing of it, but it could also mean through our relationships and how we relate to people. Like we externalize the internal rather than internalize the external. These forms that she says are inherently alien to us. You know, like desiring what the status quo has taught us to desire, letting other people's opinions of us decide how we move and act, living from their perspective, their judgment, their expectations, and then coming to the end of our lives and saying, wow, I never lived a day for myself. You know what I mean? I never lived a day from myself is even more powerful. And then to this point of integrating everything within us, and moving from that place, listen to this. Okay, so she says, for as we begin to recognize our deepest feelings, we begin to give up, of necessity, being satisfied with suffering and with self-negation, and with the numbness which so often seems like their only alternative in our society. Our acts against oppression become integral with self, motivated and empowered from within. In touch with the erotic, I become less willing to accept powerlessness or those other supplied states of being which are not native to me, such as resignation, despair, self-effacement, depression, and self-denial. And there is, for me, she says, no difference between writing a good poem and moving into sunlight against the body of a woman I love. Wow, I just love her so much. That is so powerful. Oh my goodness, like, wow. Wow. And there is, for me, no difference between writing a good poem and moving into sunlight against the body of a woman I love. Now, the reason why that is so powerful when it comes to today's conversation on romantic longing is she's saying that erotic energy, erotic potential is something that we can find as much in, for her, writing a good poem. Now you have to find what is that for you and moving toward the body of a woman I love. So that's what I was saying around feeling unfulfilled in my life and craving romantic longing. What I really was also craving is another space of eros in my life. And now that's how I feel about creating. Podcasts especially. It is erotic. It is filled with the feeling I think that I imagine she had about writing a poem. It's energizing. It's enlivening. It's passionate. It's not a fairy tale. It's not without suffering. It's not without pain. But it is the type of pain that I choose for myself because it is more pleasure and it is more aliveness and it is more alignment and spiritual fulfillment and nourishment. And it is more purposeful and it is more like something that I feel fully is in tune with my soul and my spirit. And so I feel as much enlivened by creating this podcast and devoting myself to it and interacting with you all through it as I do to the prospect of moving towards people that I may love and come to love in the romantic and erotic sense. And I'm also committed to finding other forms of eros and queering the understanding that it can only be activated through the romantic paradigm shaped by the colonizer's imagination. Okay? Okay. So let us move on to the next point, which links to the conversation we were having on self-love. And that is love yourself in response to your romantic longing. Channel the romance into yourself, but do not stop there. Do not stop there. So you know when they say romanticize your life? So that is valid and meaningful, but it can only be a starting point. Why? Because of Ubuntu, because we exist as relational beings, because we only exist through relationship. And because when we become more loving, we change the world. We change each other. And if we move through the world as love and through love, we literally can have such a phenomenal ripple effect on the people and the forces in our lives. So that is where the bell hooks quote comes in. She does say that women cannot live by self-love alone. I dare to make that proclamation in response to the barrage of advice-giving material in self-help books that pits self-love against our need to love and be loved by others. And I think that's exactly the point that I was trying to make with the idea of romanticizing your life and how focused on the self it tends to be. It's not really romanticize the people in your life, which I think is a beautiful understanding of romanticization, but that's not what they're saying on the gram. That's not what they're saying on Twitter. It's really romanticize your life. And I think that has had a positive impact in many ways, but I think we need to understand that self-love is just a starting point. The goal is to create a loving society where love can thrive and all kinds of love can thrive. Love of self, love of each other. Just love can be a species or an organism or a forest or an ecosystem that is just like everywhere thriving in all its manifestations. The next piece of advice I want to give you is that longing is love. So I believe that we all truly seek love in all of its manifestations. And so when we are not feeling the love that we think we could be feeling, like we all seek to be the highest manifestation of love that we can be, and to receive the highest manifestation of love that we can receive. And so that when we are not in that space of feeling love and feeling loving, we start to invent and construct these illusions, these hopes. I love that in Spanish, the word ilusión means both hope and also illusion. And I think there is a philosophical claim that can be made there whereby even though hopes and dreams and fantasies can be incredible and they can be life-giving and they can literally sustain us in times of despair and difficulty, they also are often tied to illusion. They may never come to be. They may be a complete misrepresentation of reality because they don't exist. So we have to invent them and construct them. So when we think of longing as love, what we see is that we are beings who want love to channel through us. But now the drain is blocked because we are craving romantic love, but we are not in a position to receive it. So now we have a choice to say, fuck, the drain is blocked. Or we can say, wow, what is at the root of this longing for romantic love? It's love itself. And I want to read you this quote by a philosopher named A.H. Almas, okay? And listen to this. The origin of all feeling is love. The first feeling is love. If you follow your feelings all the way back, what will you come to finally? And so, if everything comes back to love, then what if our romantic longing is a response to the love we have not received? The love we know we are capable of receiving, the love we have not given, and the love we know we are capable of giving. So it all comes back to love. Our need to be loved, our pain at the ways that we have not been loved. And what Bell Hooks says in Communion is that many of us are using the romantic ideal to create a sense of salvation from the way that our families and our caregivers have failed to love us, from the trauma of that and the pain of that. So if longing is love, and love is an energy that heals, that connects us to each other, then any love that we leave dormant within us is, in a sense, a lost opportunity, a waste. Do you remember in the episode I did on being cancelled? I'm not sure if you've listened to that, but essentially at the end of it, I was speaking about disposability culture. And I read a quote by Adrienne Marie Brown, where she says that nothing in nature is disposable. Everything in nature is made useful for some other process. So compost is an example she gives. There's nothing that is wasted if nature is left to its own devices. And yet when we are longing and then we just silence that longing or do nothing with that longing, that is love seeking to pulsate through us. We must do something with it because it is an energy, and energy moves, energy can move us closer to the world that we want to see, which is a world rooted in love. So If longing is love, then how can we come back to love? How can we reflect on the ways that we are desiring to love and be loved, on the ways that we have failed to love and be loved, and recognize that this is a child that just wants to be loved within us, and also a child that feels that they want to give more love than they're currently giving. But that is so powerful, and that can be channeled away from the blocked drain and into literally the abundance of everything else. And I love the idea of love as an abundant energy that we are taught to see as scarce, and that our society erects barriers such that it is, in many ways, made to be scarce. You know, barriers in terms of who is seen as lovable, who is seen as desirable. Barriers in terms of not teaching us how to love and how to be loved, how to relate to each other in a deeply loving way. Imagine what a different society we would live in if that was the education we were receiving. Is literally, how can you be a manifestation of love on this planet? How can you be love? How can you give love? How can you receive love? How can we completely remove all the barriers in our world that exist between us and love? So, to that point of this blocked drain, longing is filled with erotic energy. Like, that is what longing is. That's why when you hear the word, you go, you know, because it's filled with that juiciness. It's filled with that aliveness, that passion, that mystery. And so if it's filled with this erotic energy, then what else can it be channeled into? And I don't just mean the self. We must be also facing and being towards others. If we are yearning to give this love to a romantic partner, how can we say, well, who else could I give it to then? Like, I've always felt in my life, I have so much more love to give to children. And I wish I was in a society that made it a bit easier to do that, that removed the barriers between elder people who want to support children and children. And I know I could be doing things like there's teaching and there's, support and volunteering. And I have cousins that I could go visit. Like, there are ways that I could do that. But I've always felt we should live in a society that makes it so easy for people who have love to give that love to people who need it. And yet there are all these barriers erected. There's a lot of barriers. Many of us yearn to teach, but cannot find students, even though there are students who are seeking our lessons. And so there's all of this yearning and longing that exists. And I believe imagine our whole society was structured on that. If government was about governing love, and by governing, I don't mean restricting and barring it, but enabling it. If the government's role of our society was to make sure that love has the conditions to flourish, which means we are taught to be loved, we are taught to be loving, we grow up being loved and being loving, we are schooled in love, we are schooled in the many innovations and possibilities around love. How can we love differently? How can we love more expansively? And the teachers and scholars of love today are Black people, queer people, trans people, polyamorous people for whom love has become an act of survival. And they are also collectivist cultures for whom love has always been the basis of how we relate to one another. Love between cousins, love between siblings, and yet at the same time, without a deeper schooling and interrogation, abuse can also flourish within those systems. But I really love that idea of what if the role of these structures was simply to facilitate, enable, and grow love rather than grow economies, rather than grow conflict, rather than grow pain and grow profit. What if the goal was to grow love and plant seeds of love and nurture them? The next thing I want to leave you with is embrace love as a verb to practice rather than a noun to receive. And this is a little bit of tough advice to hear for some people, because so many of us are really focused, and even the idea of romantic longing. We long as though we'll reach a state where someone will love us and then we will also love them, right? But we are manifestations of love right now. We are potentialities of love, in the sense that at any moment you can choose right now to be loving. Okay? Like, if each of us learn to see that we are love's potential, like, we always have the potential to practice love now. It may not be in the romanticized sense of it that we've imagined, but what she says in the book Communion is that so many of us are more focused on receiving love than on being loving, on practicing the actual skill of love. Love is tied to action. It's not tied to theory. It's tied to what we are actually willing to do. Love is a practice. It's so funny. Again, what if the society was rooted in love? So many of us are taught to have a meditation practice, a journaling practice, a self-care practice. Are we ever taught to have a loving practice towards others? Like, oh, did you practice love today? No. Oh, how unproductive. Like, I don't like productivity culture, but I find it so interesting how there's no way of accounting for being loving towards others. I remember one day I was on a phone call with my best friend and we were speaking, and he was telling me how today he helped his dad with some tasks around the house, and then he spoke to his mom about this and that book, and then he spoke to me on the phone for an hour and a half, and then in our call he was saying, damn, like I have not been productive today at all. And it was so interesting because I was reflecting to him all the amazing ways he had been loving today towards his parents, towards me, towards himself. And yet that cannot be accounted for in this capitalist colonial imagination of time and of productivity. Like when we are loving, we will not be rewarded for that. And that's also why like people are less loving than they could be, is because the culture is not really encouraging them to, and then also the structure does not enable them to fully be loving. And yet I think this is a little bit of a false idea, because it's often the communities that are hardest hit by war, pain, by supremacy, by oppression, that are the most loving internally. So we know that love can thrive even in the worst conditions, from the concrete who knew that a flower could grow. And so this deep commitment to love that we have always had, and like we can become much more loving. And we know that it's not a perfect dream scenario, because we know what has happened to fracture and fragment and, divide and all of these things among us. But I will say that love can flourish even in the midst of all of these oppressive systems. And it's actually crucial that we make sure that it will, because that's how we pave the way to a new type of world that is structured in love, is by being loving now, not by waiting for love to come. By saying, okay, I am craving, like for me, this is an outlet of love. This is a way that I can be a manifestation of love on this planet. And I've now reconceptualized my purpose as that. Like sometimes I'll ask myself, how can I be loving today? Instead of my to-do list, what if I put love at the center of my day today? What would that person do? So I want to leave you with first a quote and then a question, and that's going to conclude part 1. And it is only part 1, so do listen back. And that is, A.H. Elmas says, our nature is love. We are, in fact, the source of love. So the most powerful force within us is the loving force. And I think that's really powerful. Like, how can we remove the conceptual barriers we've placed between us and love? How can we be and act as love would act? What would you do next if you were to be love instead of to wait to be loved? And you do deserve both. Let me be clear. I'm not saying that it becomes unsustainable if you are acting in loving ways and you are not receiving love back from the universe. Okay? But what I want to ask you and ask us today is, how can we be more loving today? How can we channel the romantic longing that we have, the longing to be chosen and to choose, the longing to be held and to hold, the longing to be validated by someone in our life, and experience these things that we've been taught from such a young age are so critical to the human experience? How can we channel that longing, which is love, which is our need to be loved? And how can we channel that into being loving? What would you do next? What would your to love list do? Write a to love list. And even if you do one thing to be more loving, what would that be? I love you so much, and I'm sending you all the love today, and I'm hoping for a world that is really rooted in love. This is an act of love, and I hope that you receive it. I hope that you feel it. I just want to say all kinds of love are so needed, and each way that we resist the description of love that has been given to us, and we move from the inward place outward, from our own definitions and our own needs and desires outwards in a loving way, the more we can reconstruct and recreate the world. And there's that quote by Octavia Butler, all that you touch, you change, and all that you change, changes you. What will you touch? What will you let change you? And I'm hoping you have a wonderful, wonderful week filled with love. If self-love is all that is accessible to you at the moment, self-love is a universe. There's so much to be, do, experience within the realm of self-love. And yet, if you can find ways to be loving towards others, online or offline, how can we be more loving to ourselves and to each other, to the universe as well? I'm sending you all the love. I hope to see you on part 2. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you on the next episode. Please do interact, send me voice notes, let me know what you think, and I'm just really grateful to be on this journey with you. Okay, love you so much. Bye. I hope some paradigms have been shifted for you in today's conversation. As always, if you can, please leave a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify. Like, comment, subscribe. I love you so, so much. Okay, I love you. Join me on my Substack. Links in the comment section. Go there. Okay, love you so much. Love you. Bye.